Okay, hi. We're still on Chapter 1, and we're talking about Module 3, which is the scientific method. Hopefully you've all had some experience with the scientific method in your other science classes, but we'll just go through it. This is what you're going to need to know for the test. The scientific method is observing, questioning, forming a hypothesis, conducting an experiment, or collecting data. We're going to talk about the difference between those. Interpreting the results, and then publishing the findings. And if the hypothesis is rejected, then you are going to go back and form a new hypothesis. So that's what that is. But it's right here, and but I want you to write it on your sticky note in your book. By the way, I will be checking these, so make sure you do it. So here's a little brief definition of each one. And again, I got this from the text. It's a testable question, a hypothesis about how something works. So you're looking around the world and your environment, and you're asking a question. Why does this happen? And then the variables are conditions that change. So that might be like, can this plant grow in the dark? Why do plants need light to grow? Something like that. And then if you change the lighting conditions, that would be a variable. Independent variable is not dependent on any factors, and the dependent variable is influenced by other factors. We have more of doing the math, and this is more of, read this, but this is more about the different stages of the scientific method. There's a case study here you could read and the results, which we can go over in class if anybody wants to. But we're going to talk a little bit right now about controlled versus natural experiments. So as you can see, let me go back to this page. As you can see in this case study, this experiment was done in the lab. In a lab, you have a very controllable environment. It's small scale, and you can manipulate and control variables much better. An experiment in the lab, which is called a controlled experiment, is actually, it determines relationships in the end. The relationship between light and plant growth, for example. That was a simple example. But now we're going to talk about natural experiments. So natural experiments are a larger scale, and they're based on some sort of a natural event. And we cannot do a controlled experiment about the solar system, right? That's a grand example. But we also can't do a lab experiment on the erosion of the northeast coast. Like, there's certain things you cannot do in a lab, right? Because they're too huge. So in these experiments, they're called natural experiments. We actually collect data, we observe, right? We make observations and we collect our data. And in the end, when we are all said and done, this kind of experiment shows correlation. Okay, so we have things that could go wrong in an experiment and human well-being. And then you're going to do your Module 3 review, which is right here. Practice questions. And then we have, in this book, I love in this book, we have working towards sustainability. So at the end of each chapter, they try to apply the concepts that you've learned. And this is why you want to read this. It's not just thrown in there to take up space. Actually, it's there to take the concepts that you've learned in this particular unit on, on the environment. And it's going to go through a case study and show how these students, use the concepts. And these are critical thinking questions. And as we know, the AP exam is going to have critical thinking. And the assessments that we do in this class will be more critical thinking questions, free response questions. We call them FRQs. So I want you to try to do these. I'll be assigning that for homework. And then we have our Chapter 1 review, so you can revisit the goals and look at this key terms. This is very important. These are all the terms that we talked about. And if you did all the sticky notes that I suggested, you should know almost every single one of those. And by the way, you could put more sticky notes if you want, but the ones that I've given you are the bare minimum. And then again, we have the math practice, which we're going to tackle in a different way. And that's it. That's chapter 1.